Let's talk about what you do in your class. So I teach undergraduate students, mostly introductory level classes. So I'm teaching a lot of freshmen. So I'm doing a lot of active
Mhm.
learning to get them engaged. And I'm also kind of like indoctrinating them into the college experience. So I do a lot of
Mhm.
metacognition and things in my class. But I'm so
Mhm.
excited to hear about your experience teaching graduate students. And so I
Mhm.
asked, so the thing that we do on this podcast is we discuss professors' most effective teaching strategies, and yours are
Mhm.
relationship building and flipped classroom. So I would love to hear about
Mhm.
how you use that in your teaching.
For sure. If I start with relationship building, I think I always thought that this was intuitive, common knowledge, self-explaining, so to speak. But this past semester, I actually did my campus offered a certificate on culturally responsive teaching. It was an application only thing, and I went for it because actually teaching is my favorite part of my job, and so I'm always doing all these. It's a faculty learning community, and so there was a small group of us, and we shared different things. And I remember when I would talk about some of the relationship things I did, the other faculty would be like, "Oh, tell me more." And I just thought everybody isn't doing this, and I realized that it's a couple of things. One, it's the counselor in me, where relationships are just part of what we do. But also, two, because I teach graduate classes, my largest class is 40 students in any given semester. And I know some of my colleagues who are doing undergrad, they have hundreds of students. So it's very different in that sense of just the gamut, the space, or the amount of relationships you need to build, so to speak. But what I have found consistently, and when I look at my teaching evaluations, outside of the energy I bring to the classroom, which I think helps with the relationship, I think just students have often talked specifically about feeling seen and heard in my class, and that's intentional for me. So every semester, one thing I do is by like week 3 or 4, I need to know every student's name. And I've been quite successful with that. Now, once the semester's over, it leaves my brain and I forget all the names. But when we are in the semester, I know who you are and where you're sitting. And then when they, like in the first 2 weeks when they change seats, I'll be like, dang it, you changed your seat. And they'll laugh. I'll just make jokes. And I think that's part of the relationship building, is where I just make even just random side comments. Or even on the very first day when I introduce myself and introduce the class, I talk about how I'll tell them how, all my classes are highly interactive. I want them to talk to me. I don't like lecturing at students. We do lots of dialogue. And I'll say something to them like, so if I ask you a question and you stare at me in silence, I'm a counselor. I'm comfortable with silence. So I'll stare at you and it'll be awkward and we'll just look at each other and they'll laugh. And that laughter already just it breaks the ice a little bit, where they're like, okay, she's a bit chill. And then I even think when I think of that relationship, is them also seeing me as not just this power up here that has the knowledge. So sometimes even with counseling, when I'm given random examples, I'll use Chick-fil-A as an example of a skill, right? If I want to talk about how do you reflect a feeling, I might say, oh, I think Chick-fil-A is the best sandwich and I prefer it over McDonald's. And they'll laugh at just hearing me talk about Chick-fil-A. They'll be like, what? But they heard the skill that I was trying to teach. And so I like to do, I would say, just small things like that show the human being behind the professor, but also helps them feel seen. So in talking about random things that I think foster that interaction, that's one. I also use a ton of cooperative learning strategies to facilitate that relationship. So not just the relationship between me and them, but for them to build relationships with one another. So think, pair, shares are a big one for me. 3-minute review. So for anyone who doesn't know, so a think, pair, share is when I ask the question, I have them think of a response, pair up with somebody to share your answer, and then we share out loud as a group. And then the 3-minute review, when I have time, because we talk so much that I rarely ever get to the end, but it's just a quick get with a partner and do a 3-minute review of the class. Sometimes I'll have driven questions of what are you taking away and what questions are still lingering, or just what did you learn that was new or what surprised you in the reading, just a 3-minute review of the learning for the week. And I'm intentional about getting them talking to each other. Sometimes even when we're about to do an activity, I'll say, look around the classroom, find somebody you've never talked to before, and now that's your partner for this activity. And I'll remind them, before you start, make sure you introduce yourself first and then do the project. And so really just helping them foster that relationship also, because I think that helps the learning, not just how they feel in interaction with me, but when you can turn to the person next to you and ask a question or have conversation or share ideas, that really brings them into the moment, into the room, allows them to feel seen and builds that community. And then we can do communal learning. And I have consistently found that process makes teaching more enjoyable for me and for the students. It's because for me, it's, I come in, for example, I think of last week when I went into class, I hadn't seen them in 2 weeks. And just something as small as saying, I feel like I haven't seen y'all in forever, even though it's been a week. And then they laugh. And I think one of my goals is every time, if my students can laugh at least once without me intentionally telling a joke, that to me is a win, right? Like, it's just, because to me, I think just laughter is like, ooh, like once you laugh, your body just, your physiological system just comes down a bit, right? If you're laughing, your brain tells you you're safe. And so if they can feel safe in the room, they're more available to learn. And so every time they chuckle or laugh a little bit, for me, that's a win, because it's okay. They're here, they're present, they're feeling safe, which means they're available to learn. And so that's what I would say relationship building looks like for me.